Okay. Hey everyone, welcome back to A Life Economy, dedicated to exploring the intersection of technology, consciousness, and spirituality. I'm your host, Cosmo Sharf, and on today's episode, we're joined by entrepreneur and visionary Scott Vineberg. Welcome, Scott.
Good to be with you, Cosmo.
Yes, absolutely. So just to give a little bit of background on your work and what you've been up to, you've started a number of businesses, including Prometheus, which was mentoring at-risk youth in Montreal, as well as a fondue restaurant and a company that produces high-end women's fashion and shoes and accessories. And you've also been an ayahuasca facilitator for a number of years. And my first question is, there seems to be a bit of a stark contrast between the ayahuasca business and some of your other experience starting companies. So I'd love to get a sense of how you got into the whole ayahuasca ceremony practice.
Yeah, good question. It goes back to taking drugs when I was a kid, really. I mean, when you want to get into it. And I think that's where it begins for most people in the West who are coming into the world of entheogens and what we call plant medicine, is there's an exploratory nature that I think many of us have. And at 15 years old, found myself attracted to the idea, reading in magazines and journalism of the, and Cheech and Chong, right? And Carlos Castaneda, of like what the escape could be of the mystical path through substance and the playful path and the joker. And that was just an attractor to me. So when you get to the root of it, it's to engage with reality at the level. I mean, this is deciphering it in hindsight, an attraction and a curiosity for understanding reality at the level where there's a kind of another layer to it, where the suspicion that something like a Matrix before the movie was there was present to me. And so wanting to play and reach for, the red pill in this case, which was to buy my first joint as a kid in high school. I guess it was junior high. And I literally got narked on by the seller because it was my first joint, and he got caught and turned me, the neophyte, in. So I got suspended for a month in the 8th grade.
Wow.
On my first point, major drug trauma. Right?
Oh, boy.
And so, then years go by, and I've had some really, I think one of the breakthrough experiences was in college, where instead of being the trippy thing and we're having fun and trying extraordinary things because something interesting is happening, there was a moment where 2 other friends and I really dropped into a state on LSD where it was really a kind of existential playground. And it was like a Satori moment. We were riffing on each other's humor, words, everything that came up was one, and we could almost read each other's minds, and the great joke and the laughter of it all. And it was really just like an existential improv comedy thing that went on for like 4 or 5 hours. And it really left a mark of like a special kind of esoteric experience that could happen. And then I got to California, and after, pursuing the path defined by my conditions, being a Jewish kid growing up in Montreal, was entrepreneur. And my own inquisitive nature took me to philosophy, math, and esoteric studies in college. And then coming out to California after I'd done the business thing, looking for something different. A lot of my life had broken down. A friend called me from Montreal, said, come back and you got to try this thing, ayahuasca. And I went back and I had the most powerful otherworldly experience. So vivid, so clear, so precise, and alternative reality presented to me in that experience, that I was left profoundly affected. And it really took me to another level of curiosity to wonder what else there really is, right, behind this, and then it's just started a whole journey from there.
Amazing. And around what year was your first introduction to this idea of ayahuasca? I would imagine that it wasn't quite so well known back then, at least within our culture.
It was 2004, so it was. I really didn't know about this at all. I read a little bit about it, Yahe, in William Burroughs' book that he wrote on this. I think it was Burroughs, yeah, or Ginsberg. I think, yeah, it was Burroughs and someone else in the 1950s wrote a book called Yahe, where he was taking journeys down to Central America and one of the first Westerners to discover and describe the experience. And that's like the Colombian native tribes language for it. But, it was so powerful, was going back to literally where I grew up and where I spent time in the country. So I moved to California, and this ceremony happened with the son of the yoga teacher that I had spent 6 years training hardcore Ashtanga, power yoga type practice.
Mm-hmm.
His son, this woman who introduced me, a guitarist she brought along to accompany her and me, within a mile of where I spent all my weekends in a natural kind of native type setting, north of the city, by about an hour. And so it was like a strange homecoming setup that it would be there, because it could have been in any one of the more distant exurbs surrounding Montreal.
Right. Fascinating synchronicity. Certainly, I resonate with what you mentioned earlier about this quest of looking to understand the nature of reality, right? What is going on here in our lives. And certainly, psychedelics are a powerful tool, one of many, to start to begin to understand that. Of course, I don't think we ever are going to truly know 100% everything, all there is to know about the nature of this world and this life and all of that. But I'm curious, how have psychedelics, I mean, when it comes to ayahuasca or LSD or whatever, how have they been important to you in your life in terms of your spirituality and getting to understand what this life is all about?
That's a good question also. It's interesting because it took me into the New Age in the strongest way to believe in the possibility of, at first aliens, mm-hmm. and then other dimensions, and then really the much greater clarity in the notion that our human interface design is a way of cartoonizing patterns that are expressed as energy, form, and matter. And so where people really get hung up on the idea, and I'd studied, physics and a little bit of quantum physics introductory to in college, reading Einstein's work literally and studying the theorem. And the implications of really getting that, especially when you get into more contemporary physics, that there's no particle. And even every stage that they break down the particle, all they're doing now is describing patterns of behavior of one particle against another. And there's no particle. A particle is just, again, a micro cartoon to describe a behavior pattern. So what I really got more deeply than anything was that all this is behavior pattern. And whoever or whatever is regulating in terms of natural laws, there's portals to other worlds that don't behave according to natural laws at all, that are visible and experientially experienceable from the inside. And so I've been to some of those other worlds, and I've had conversations with people who've gone very vividly to other places. And so what it animated for me most powerfully and surprisingly was, all the faith-based stories and experiences of Jesus or Moses or beings, these could have happened here, and it doesn't freaking matter. These are parallel timelines. They as much as if there is a creator, and I'm pretty sure there's a creator, it can choose whatever the fuck it wants. And it can play, and as it does, very graciously with the lightest touch. And I really got, after experiencing powerful other entities and beings, and just the very fact of being on the skin of this whole huge world, floating around this giant universe, and we're some intelligent little microcosm emanation of nature, I really, really got that if we're the accidental microcosm of this, then the likelihood that the accidental arisal of super meta intelligence out of the whole of it is probably a lot greater than the likelihood of me. And on top of which, and then you have all the wisdom traditions top levels saying the story is real. So I don't know what real means, and it doesn't matter, right? These parallel realities can coexist, And whatever the creator decides is the truth in the end, is the truth in the end. It's a weird thought, but that's what I got, because I
Very
got it
fascinating.
already expressed its hand beyond the alien. Creator has expressed his hand, and the alien freaking intelligences suggest that that's so, that there is such an intelligence. That's a hard one to grasp.
So what you're mentioning about particles, just to jump back to that real quick, reminds me of some videos I was watching with David Wilcock talking about how particles are actually just the corners or the edges of a larger geometry, and that they only appear like particles when you look at them in a certain perspective, but ultimately they're only waves. And I don't really profess to understand that or know if that's true, but I always thought that was something that was interesting. When you talk about these other worlds or entities that you've been to or that you've talked with, are there any that stand out that are really, that come to mind as being particularly surprising or insightful?
Yeah, yeah. Because it's all, in a way, conducive to the mind of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And for how I came into ayahuasca, you know, I can't say that I was like a clean soul, right? Life, contemporary society. There's a whole bunch of stuff to feed into it, but the way that the intelligence, our own and the universe, presents, in this case, in my third or fourth ceremony in Brazil, in a song circle ceremony, I was really taken into a deep state. And it was like an induction into something like an ancient Egyptian rite of passage.
Hmm.
And at one point, I was in these, it was like these testing realms, very like dark energy,
Mm-hmm.
and like complete power over me. Like I had no volition whatsoever.
Hmm.
And whatever the entity or beings were, I could feel their intelligence. And it was like I was handed over by spirit to a testing agent. And that intelligence, like a Joker agent, but with like, you couldn't name the list of knives and things and whatever that it had. And it was deeper than that because it knew you could just be extinguished, right? Or just taken into like infinite places of the longest suspension. So it was really that entity or presence manifested at one point as something like a, what is it, like a latex, a dark, shiny latex clad Dom, super being, spider type character.
Awesome.
And
I know, hard to
it was,
describe, right?
but it was like, and it's like, you just imagine a superhero character that can take any guise. The intelligence that presents is what you're really dealing with. And when you reckon with that, and it's like know that it's a lower emanation of the creation, it's very, very humbling. Just put it that way. And it's very real. Like, I
Wow.
don't even know how.
Yeah. I mean, the closest thing that I have in my own experience to that level of presence is in lucid dreams or astral projections. I've had a handful of those kinds of experiences over the past few years where I'm in some other world, and the level of presence, the reality of that experience is just as real as this dimension is, where we're talking to each other, but in some weird way that almost doesn't make any sense. Almost more real than being here, like more presence, more colorful, more vibrant. And so, yeah, having those kinds of experiences, I wake up and I'm like, what is this reality? It's just one possible dimension of many other multitude of possibilities. And so I definitely agree. There's a level of it's a humbling experience, to say the least, when you are in these other places or interacting with other forms of intelligence, and you realize you have more context for your life here, you start to understand how this is just one potential movie that you could be experiencing out of many other possible ones.
Well, just to give an example, just so it wasn't all like that, by the way. The only reason I
Sure.
stuck with it was A, I was getting a sense that there was a deeper teacher than I ever would have subjected myself to. In terms of mentorship,
Mm-hmm.
I'd had
Wow.
mentors, but never really a strong mentor that I could trust and entrust my soul in a way with the process. And what I got with
Mm.
ayahuasca, that experience and others, was here was a teacher, right? Here was a teacher where I was going to be brought into the edge of myself and really
Wow.
still trusted to myself to navigate. And one contrasting experience was with a shaman named Christina Mendoza, who's sitting out in Ojai. I had the experience with her. She just sung like a beautiful kind of mama angel. And after the second cup, walked outside of this little, hut that we had the ceremony in, and I was fumbling, and I looked up at the stars, and I could barely put words to how unified and beautiful and total and like a child I felt, and really
Mm.
got back to the state of the purity of just like being a little being in the world, and with undifferentiated, very hardly differentiated thought, and just like this beautiful feeling of being in the field of love. And that's really
Mm.
one of the most dominant feelings that I had in all my experiences in ayahuasca. Would wind up with that almost every night. And that was probably the thing that came me back to it, wound up leading me on the way to become a ceremony facilitator, was a ceremony format that really aimed for
Mm.
that, where we did a unified field experience of profound regularity and utter, like, incredible, vivid strength and presence and reality, such that it was shared by all the 10, 20, 30, 40 people in the room at a time when we held ceremony.
Mm. Yeah, there's certainly a level of awe and beauty that one can find having these kinds of experiences that is interesting, because you're not necessarily seeing something that isn't there. You're seeing something that's already there. You just weren't paying attention to it, or you're seeing your perception of reality, of nature, of the world is heightened, is amplified to the degree where you really start to feel like a kid again. And it's that state of mind that is so precious and valuable, and something that I think we could all use a little bit more of, because we get into these habits of uh, painting reality over with a dull paintbrush with eyes glazed over, because we think we've seen it all, right? And then it takes certain experiences to kind of snap you out of that, right? Um, I'd love to chat a little bit about the historical context of ayahuasca and psychedelics. There's this growing movement right now to decriminalize plant medicines, as we're seeing in Denver, Colorado, in Oakland. Um, Suddenly, there's various cities popping up where they're starting to recognize the healing properties of these ancient technologies. And where do you see uh, the role of plant medicine in our culture going forward?
I love that question, dude. I have very specific visions. You know how I operate, right? Where it's one, I ask this question, it's like, oh, this could work.
Mm-hmm.
What would be better and where would it go? And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to give you the shorthand. What I observed in 10 years or 15 years around the world of psychedelics in this evolving form is it's coming to break us open. We're seeking it and drawing it towards us worldwide. CEOs,
Mm.
Silicon,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Michael Pollan, legalization of marijuana, gateway drug to
Right.
the literally gateway drug to the opening to these entheogens at large. I know
Mm-hmm.
people who are like cutting in terms of the leading the legalization and the clinical trials for MDMA, which are phase 3 and about to go legal. People opening facilities and doing pilot projects for facilities that will become franchises across the US and chains. We already know that ketamine is being used therapeutically and more
Right.
broadly in the context of this research to deal with depression, Psilocybin's on track, and legalization is only like a year or two away for psilocin. And then they're going to bring the 5-MeO, they're going to bring everything. And what we're getting differently now, the evolution has two forms. One, it's like all medicine and everything, and the project that we're working on, it's increasingly being seen as part of integrative practice, which involves the multidimensionality of the human being treated in context of this one intervention, but also in time. So it's a multidimensional approach, and seeing the whole human with this is just a powerful, but just a fulcrum, just a catalyst. And then the suite of other support and awareness of the whole human and their intent, along with support for that person in time, is really the crucial missing. And that's what we found in our circle was the great thing. I literally experienced this as a shaman and as a participant. Breakthroughs and epiphanies galore. I was a total epiphany addict. I love it.
That's a fascinating phrase. I like that.
And we did integration circles after we did ceremony, and we were unusual in LA, other than the Santo Daime, to be a regular monthly or bi-monthly event. So we had recurrent witnessing with our peers, but there was a lack of accountability and structure for the integration. So it's not just elementary school circle where you sit around and share freely. That's baby steps. Oh, I feel safe here. I'm being heard. So no one's telling me that I'm a bullshit artist with my own life. Cool. That's baby step. That's elementary school. Integration for real happens where you opt in for your growth. And then there's people there to hold you to accountability for your growth and actually realizing what you say you want to do. Yeah.
So
those are two big.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was thinking as you're rattling off all the this trend of the legalization of various therapies like MDMA and ketamine and psilocybin and all that. I'm like, wow, there's really something happening here. And then I think about that juxtaposed, like all the craziness and chaos in the news and the fear and the scariness of so many world events of terrorism and war and poverty. And it's like these two things butted up against each other, where it's like this darkness and this light, like we're on the precipice of the legalization of some very powerful and important tools that can enhance our consciousness. Now, granted, they're not a panacea, right? Like they're not going to just immediately and instantly fix everyone's problems, but certainly, we as a culture have been losing out on the value that some of these substances can provide to us over the last, 100 years, or I don't even know exactly how long the prohibition has been going on for.
Thousands.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move a little bit towards what you've been up to with Eden.coop, and maybe how you see the decriminalization of these plant medicines moving us towards that vision of what you describe as Eden.
Well, they could be tools for integrative awareness, and really the way that you could wish that someone could get a new interface awareness. Oh, look, we've developed a way of seeing Earth with all the data mapped, right? Whereas in ayahuasca, what'll just happen is that people will say, wow, I saw it as a living being. I saw our city as a living being, humanity as a whole, right? That whole on view and that projection that we have that becomes vivid is just a great model of what VR can do, maybe, right? Like, but in a way that it is VR. It's a VR playground in one way. It's a way of getting this unified field connection where you really feel part of a whole with a group of other people and understand what it is to stay in that space when you're in communication, in teams. So for me, it's really the takeaways that I got from my experience are the things that I'm bringing to bear in what I call the Eden Project. Early on was like a vision of like the risk of climate change and a keen awareness of that. Coming back from Brazil, I think on my second trip there in 2006, 2005, 2006, I was flying back and was like, whoa, we should just have a competition where a bunch of the kids in Brazil, one group per state, is in a reality TV show competition, taking some decimated land with their Home Depot as a sponsor, and they build paradise. And it's like a whole bunch of teams trying to go from bare land, young millennials or whatever it was at the time, turning it into like the next level eco-village community. And we can model that around the world. And it was like, it really started a process for me of imagining what our trajectory could be from the world as it is to the better world, right? So that's number one. And that's really at the heart of the Eden thing, where even as I try to bring my own projection and specific visions, what it keeps coming back to is an invitation for co-creation. And really hanging back in the field right now saying, if we're really moving into a much more democratic and participatory era, and there's no one who can really dictate anymore what it is, even as they try. It's really, I guess, the first challenge and proposition is, how do we start to imagine together better? Because without that, the so-called dark, dissonant, chaotic force just keeps playing its hand. You know, individual greed, organizational prerogatives that are unintelligent take the lead because there's no vision to compete. But as soon as there's an iota of clear, coherent, collective vision, that's so powerful. It's like the light that I think will almost wipe out everything in the way. So it's about getting a process first for us to be able to get together and then come to agreement together and then have a feeling for that thing is that we create together, just a vision. Right? And it might be visions, but they might all fit within one framework that everyone can see, oh, all these visions could coexist in that framework. Let's go, right? Then we start the doing. But that piece feels like it's the great missing right now. A new mythology, a new revelation, a new dream.
This is something that Zenka.
So, if you're going to help with that, you drugs.
Yeah, this getting aligned on the world that we want to live in, the world that we want to create is so crucial. But for some reason, the dystopian narratives seem to be much more prevalent, probably because they make for good stories. But this is, a point that Zenka made on the previous podcast, and something that, we all talk about together, is how important it is for us to stay laser focused on the reality that we want to create and be doing everything in our power to promote that vision and have it be a collective thing, right? Because it's not necessarily just like, oh, it's my idea or your idea or Zenka's idea or whoever else, it is that we're all working with, but it's, we're building the future world together, right? Because that's really the only way to do it. You talk about this trend of, the future being much more collaborative or more about the collective, but how do you balance that with still, our individual sovereignty, right? Because we still have our own passions and our own dreams and desires, but we're part of a collective. So where do you see the balance there?
I think we've done self pretty well. I don't think we've
Yeah,
even done.
You could say that in America, at least.
Right. So, it's funny because some of my friends in the personal growth and development movement, in spiritual people, and people talking about this new age being a collaborative age, that we go from the personal quest and the hero's journey to the kindred quest and the group journey. We have the contrast in terms of the functional society in China as a collectivist experiment that's working well in some ways, versus this decentralized one that shows up its weaknesses in especially the new emergence of really decentralized media, decentralized control, and how it can be gained by special interests. So right now, it's interesting because we're in a state of confusion.
Sure.
And that's both, how do we do me better when I don't have coercive powers telling me how to be? And how do we do we better now that it looks like we're breaking a lot of the paradigms down? I think they go together, and we've shared about this in our project. I think how they weave together is really where we go for all of it. We go for multidimensional activation of the person, of the self, because it's just a more satisfying to have your needs met, at
Hmm.
all levels, and then to express in creative, natural, like creative emergence. And while you're learning all this stuff, you do it in a team. You do it in a circle, you do it in a group so that you learn how to do group better. And like we generated our formula recently, better ingredients, better recipe, better pizza, right? It's like better soul craft and person crafting, better team ability skills, better world, right? And that's the generation of Eden process that we're
Right.
seeing as a co-emergent phenomenon, where all dimensions all at once, like integral theory, all quadrants, all activating.
So, yeah, you talk about better world. And when I visit your website, Eden.coop, one of the first phrases is paradise is possible. And that really stood out to me as being this very powerful phrase that struck a chord with me. It resonated. And you also talk about shifting the narrative. So, how much of making the world better is simply changing our perception about what we believe is possible? Is that really all there is, or is there more to it?
That's good. Like I like to say, the way is the game. If you're not in suffering, if I'm not in suffering, if the experience is relatively benign, then apparently the gear shift, the stick shift is the remote controls in our hands. If the situation is relatively benign, I'm not under coercive pressure or suffering with a torturer, then it's in my hands. And that's most of us in the West. So for us in particular, not everyone, but for many of us privileged ones,
Sure.
it's a choice. And if that's true, where that is true, then it's really begins with us, because then you're the center point for the group that you're working with and things that you're working on to be in a state of betterment or paradise. So it begins with the imminent, because that's every moment to moment, and you might as well not shit on the reality while you're in it. It's like, oh, this is okay. I'm not in suffering. It's a good day. Look, it's blue sky. Awesome. I feel good. My body's healthy. Oh, look, I can go to the doctor. If you are in suffering, then it still winds up being a part of the game. And then what we have as, I guess, a project that really drives the whole enterprise in space and time is the evidence that we see that there's a lot of people who don't have that opportunity to experience, that freedom of life being primarily benign, where you have the choice of what to make of it. And so our project is to make that possible for everyone, because if we
Right.
unleash everyone in their capacity, then for sure we've got this, right?
Yeah, there's so much to be grateful for. And so what's on my mind is, you know, for those of us that can, it's our responsibility to, well, at least I feel a responsibility, I should say, to do whatever I can to alleviate as much suffering as possible and to make the world as beautiful and amazing and joyful and radiant and fun. The other thing on your website that I wanted to talk about is this idea that you're proposing of QE for we, and you talk about quantitative easing. And the first thing is, of course, for people that aren't familiar, what is quantitative easing, and how are you looking to flip that around?
Wow. Yeah, I love that question. It's interesting. These are still features that I believe in as like key force multipliers to lead to a better world. The original idea was like QE for greening the planet. So the government and our central banks can print money. They have the power to issue like digital credits that banks are allowed to expand their balance sheets by and then lend to people. That's how it
Mm-hmm.
generally goes. Occasionally, they'll just print it and send it right out to businesses or the stock market or people. They're not exactly doing that, but they can do it. So we looked at that, and I really focused on this in the last Great Recession. Was like, why isn't there more money coming to the people? Why they like print $4 trillion in quantitative easing, and they only used it to shore up the bank's balance sheets that they then lend to corporations who bought back shares to inflate their share values for rich
Ridiculous.
people who helped, or they gave it to the banks to shore up the bank balance sheets, who then lent it to individuals, wealthy individuals, who then bought up our homes and bought stocks at a discount. So it really fed the concentration of wealth. And
Yep.
back then, I was like, stimulus for us. And tracking it for the last many years, saw how much more got printed over the last 10 years. And
Yep.
it was so much, no inflation. So the arguments 10 years ago that people worried about were, wow, what it'll be like Weimar Germany, where people would be with wheelbarrows full of marks and a loaf of bread will cost $1 million. Nothing like that happened, not even a bit. There was inflation in stock prices because of where the money went, but there wasn't inflation in the marketplace at large. So we look at that and I say, well, then maybe they can just print it for the green stimulus and we have a very easy tax-free situation. When the corona happened, obviously like the green thing is like backseat, right? I was full speed ahead. I'm like, we're going to green the planet with a green stimulus and the money's going to be tax-free and they're going to multiply it with loans. We'll have all the money we need. Look, this is how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Crash on COVID-19. And then it's like, well, what's burning need for people right now is to get more money. Oh, and look, that argument I've been making to deaf ears for the last 5 years to friends and people, like, look, they can print the money. Most people are like, what the hell are you talking about, Scott? Now it's like, whoa, they're printing the money. Scott, you're absolutely right. But now the beat is that I can't believe Germany's printing to the tune of 4,800 a month for people, converted from euros. UK, 3,000 a month for people. US, $1,200 one check. The latest
Pathetic.
added budget was just for small and medium business, 300 billion. Pathetic. Not even like
We're
5%
just out
of what
here scrambling for the crumbs.
And all we have really promoting the rebound for the people or the stimulus for the people right now is Sunrise Movement and the remnant of the Bernie campaign. That's it. AOC, and they're in the remnant, and they can't get on the streets because of COVID. And you're not hearing about this, but I'm tracking it. I'm on the Sunrise Movement. So if anyone's listening to this or watching this, go to sunrisemovement.org and really get with it. I'm not ideally aligned with the whole progressive liberal campaign that includes all social justice stuff in one bill.
Right.
When we really just get money to the people and prove that we can do this at scale. So then we can get the freaking Green New Deal on the same premise. But whatever it is, I back them because we need this conversation to go and no one else is leading the charge at the next level. Nobody.
Yeah, it's funny or not funny, depending on your perspective. I was a big
I just can't believe that Americans aren't more outraged. I really don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting point. I think certainly there's a level of anger, but perhaps it's balanced with fear. The fear of the virus is what's keeping people at bay. But I was a big supporter of Andrew Yang, and when he was running for president, and still am. And he's out here with this proposal for the universal basic income. We're going to give every American $1,000 a month. Everyone's like, "You're crazy. What are you talking about? We don't have money for that. How are we going to pay for that?" And everyone's like, "How are we going to pay for universal health care?" to Bernie. And then coronavirus hits, and the government prints trillions of dollars for the banks. And it's like, hello, look what's possible. So it's like, when we hear that argument, how are you going to pay for it? Or, oh, we can't pay for it. It's just, it holds no water. To me, it's a sign that someone has been brainwashed to believe in this small, powerless version of ourselves that, can't really do much. It's frustrating.
Yeah, there's something to that. I think there's it's a narrative that's self-serving. The bankers are just going to blindly serve themselves, and I don't think it's malicious. I think it's really just, wow, we need the money. Come on, print it for us like that. And but give it to the people. No, they don't really need it, even though they see what they're doing in Europe. This is what's stunning to me, is that Americans really aren't up in arms. That the press at the national level is really fighting for us. That there isn't voices among those in the journalist press who are just hammer at this the way that Fox News would hammer at some issue about Obama, about that nothing on the liberal press is just going day after day. It's like the countdown to $3,000.
It is curious.
Right? What?
Yeah.
And you know what I'm hoping for?
Sorry, you cut out there.
Ventura is talking about entering the presidential race, and I'm just like, Ventura, Yang. Oh my
Mm.
OMG, that would just shake things up so hard.
Mm.
Oh, I mean, like, not that I want a third party candidate, but I think it would take a lot of wind out of both sides. I don't think it would be mostly Democrat. I think it would really mostly pull from the libertarian right and the centrist right, and the independents would have something to like discharge on. It could actually work. That's the thing. There's so many independents
Interesting.
right now. He could win, which would be wild.
Yeah, well, what's funny about this whole corona situation is it's totally sidelined the main event of the presidential election, right? Like that's been going on still in the background with Biden and Bernie dropping out and et cetera, et cetera. But it's fascinating to see how the collective focus and attention can be magnetized towards one thing and then kind of at the drop of a pin, or rather in the span of a few weeks, let's say, because it wasn't necessarily overnight. But now, everyone's focused on the quarantine and oh, how can we get a vaccine and all that. But yeah, so it's interesting. So you're talking about, other potential moves that could be made with respect to the election. But I know that you've you are someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about politics and how to evolve our political system. You mentioned, uh, you know, you're not sure if the third party candidate could win. How do you see the election moving forward in the midst of the corona crisis?
Wow, that's a good one. You know what? There's not enough attention on it all. We need some major freaking hype machine to divert us from the corona story to the political story again. And so some new charge, because Biden can't come out. They can't bring him out because he's really not, I don't think, an ideal fit mental nimbleness.
No,
I don't know.
I don't
I don't
think
think
so
it's
either.
I don't think the disaster scenario that people are talking about. It's not the guy he was 10 years ago for sure, and that's a huge vulnerability. And I don't know why they don't have him, like, why he's at home in Delaware and not in like this beautiful modern office with like a super team of people on video screens breaking down everything every day and being the contrast to the
Right.
president. Like every day it should be the bullpen with Biden, and they're not doing it. It's just like complete missed opportunity again, right? So what I get is like, if they're not going to do that, we need someone who's a lot more media savvy to drive what I feel is the conversation that hasn't happened with Yang, with Bernie, with Trump, with any of them. Why aren't we crowdsourcing politics? Why aren't we doing the wiki to freaking solutions, one issue at a time, not really count on the third party winning, but transforming the narrative is what I'd hope Ventura and Yang to be able to do if they
Mm.
take this on. But I don't know why we don't have one party, because what happened in Europe was Podemos, and in Australia with Inspiral and Flux Party, they tend to veer left progressive. There's some libertarian movements in it in Americas and the Anglo-Saxon countries, but it hasn't been that way with the crowdsourcing stuff, is leftist and Marxist. So if we get a clean version here that's free market and socially benevolent,
Hmm.
and also crowdsourcing with the Silicon Valley meritocratic attitude, I
Yeah.
think we could have a rock star version of crowdsourcing politics and policy here. And that's what I wish for, and that's part of our narrative. I'm putting that in the field, and I'm wagering that
Mm.
this is actually going to wind up happening.
Yeah,
So,
it's a powerful
yeah.
idea. I remember in our previous conversations, you had mentioned something about how Bernie raised close to $500 million over the course of his two campaigns, but not one crowdsourced idea. Could you explore that a little bit about what you mean by that and sort of the missed opportunity?
Well, it was like I ran for Senate, but found out I was Canadian too recently to be eligible for US Senate. So I dropped my campaign. And I picked up the campaign last minute from a progressive in California who dropped out before me. So it was January 2015. And I went and heard that Bernie was running. I was like, awesome, an independent. But he's more left than the freaking Democrats. Anyway, I went to, because I'm from Montreal, I went to his HQ with the plan to say, look, we came on this great idea of crowdsourcing our political campaign. Just go on tour and cull ideas from all the people. Hold a freaking town hall wherever you go and leave the town hall operating. That's your campaign HQ. That's a super affordable campaign strategy. Drop the
Mm.
strategy on them at the HQ. Yeah, someone's going to get back to you. Not a word. Try it again, again, again. And then I was watching closely. I hosted Bernie events and everything in the last election against, when it was against Clinton and everything, and saw the greatest crowdfunding campaign in history. So the basic principle that you can make something great out of a lot of little people, proven vastly.
Absolutely.
For the single greatest crowdfunding campaign on earth ever was Bernie's total two campaigns. $400 million, nearly $500 million was out of like average $5 donations.
Yeah.
Mind demonstration of people power. But like I'm saying, the ideology that he brought forward and the policies were mostly old stuff that he had. He's a really great, diligent human being, but that stubbornness brought forward a whole bunch of ideas that are just not digestible or practical. You can't afford to give Harvard-type education to everybody with dorms and even community college, but we can do innovative forms of education for everyone that don't have stupid, huge institutional costs. You can do the same thing with healthcare, with wellness. We can do it and do a whole bunch of prevention of costs on the backside, but it can't be giving everyone a freaking stupid healthcare card for the dumb healthcare pharma system. Not it. That idea failed, Bernie, failed. But all you had to do was go out and ask some ideas, and they never did. And the same thing with Warren. There's like a whole bunch of like think tank ideas, very top heavy, very hard to understand, and so really won't enroll popular, support. Whereas if you crowdsource these things, what rises to the surface and what I call supermajority support, that locks in. That means people can get it, and that means it'll happen because they see what their Congress people are going to vote for. But if we don't have that crowdsourced ground, so anyway, the idea would be, instead of spending $400 million on ads, that's what they did. They blew most of it on conventional media feeding the evil, so-called evil machine.
Oh, that hurts.
Of the Bernie thing, he put more money in than you. He took our money and put it in. And people don't see the iron on the left.
That is terrifying.
Because the drop should have been Bernie. That's $400 million that could have seeded a neighborhood facilitator of community intelligence. That's all we needed, because once people started, they would give that person $20 a month. They give you $20 once in a while, but you hammered them with ads and emails, Bernie, saying, care about this, give me more money. We all burnt out. We're like, it's a long shot. It's like buying a lottery ticket with Bernie. But having someone locally who would be like, I'm the so-called Bernie agent in the neighborhood. We're going to find out what's going to work and really develop what works in our community. That would have been rock star. He would have left a legacy that could have lasted forever.
We're so used to this framework of voting for these individual politicians to represent us, where it's I'm Bernie or I'm Yang, and here's my ideas, and here's why you should vote for me based on these ideas and my characteristics as a person. And then we're like, oh, we like this person, we like that person, and then we're going to vote, and then we're going to pick one, and then they're supposed to represent us. Like, we're so entrenched in that system that when you're proposing this notion of crowdsourcing the policies, that was like, oh, a light bulb went off, because we already crowdsourced the finances. We're already able to do the funding that way. So why not just the ideas and really listen to people, listen to our needs, and harness that collective intelligence. That seems to be a really fascinating and key piece to the future of politics, and at least in a version that would work for us, or work for more people.
I don't think there's another way through, dude. Like in any other scenario that I've heard, even liquid democracies, like one step closer, cede power to experts because they know better. But then the communication to the populace is still subject to propaganda then. Because if, like as Daniel Schmuck puts it, if each individual or someone they know and trust directly isn't the agent of information, then in some ways it's just Coke versus Pepsi popularity contest between those two propositions at the state level. If I don't have someone immediately in my 1 or 2 degrees of separation. I trust that they trust because, a friend trusts you and you became an expert in foster youth. I became an expert in mentoring. This person became an expert in healthcare, but we know someone or we know them. And we know that they're not corrupted. We know that they've done the study. And when they ask us to support the thing that they support, that's different than liquid democracy. That's true representative democracy, where you're a participant and you really understand that you're representative in expertise rather than in voting.
Right.
Your
Big difference.
representatives in expertise become the most important agents in building a new society. So it's between having, your hub of specialized practice and then enough of those people that I really don't expect even 1 in 10 people to be an active expert. But when you think about the size and the intersection of our networks, that's enough to have one expert about everything pretty close, if not more, in our communities, in our networks, in our social. And then you'd see it come through, but they'd be informed people, not someone casually going crazy about 5G.
Right. We're also not.
Why are people getting into the details on 5G and not on a better healthcare system, or in 5G and not on a better communication system? I don't understand why the big complaint about the big one, but not a really coherent proposal for what would be better. Because we all still want cell phones.
Right.
We want bandwidth. We want the communication. So what's the alternative, 5G motherfuckers? Shut the fuck up about the problem and give me some solution.
Right.
And the solutions
Absolutely.
are there. Right?
Yep.
Doesn't that drive you crazy?
It's a good,
crazy.
It's an excellent point. It's an excellent point because, it's not like we're all going to suddenly stop using our phones or our tablets or computers and stop talking to each other. So it's like, okay, well, what do we do? So is 5G harmful or not? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of various perspectives on that, but back to the practicalities of this new political crowdsourced system that you're imagining. I'm just thinking back to, for example, voting for different ballot measures here in California, and however often those come out, and it's like every 2 or 4 years, and I do my research, and there's various articles of people, from publications or people saying this is good, this is bad, yes on this, no on that. And, ultimately it's up to me to make my own call as to whether I think something is, whether I'm going to vote for something or not. But often there's such a gray area between not really knowing what to vote for. And, I consider myself relatively well informed about what's going on in the world, say, compared to most people. I mean, I'm not like that necessarily that tapped in, but I'm also not like necessarily going to take the time to do hardcore research on each thing. So how do you address that in this potential system that you're imagining of people not having enough time in their day to really dedicate towards being say the dream citizen that we would want or wish everyone to be?
Yeah, that's a really good point too. There's there's 2 parts to it, really, more than anything, that are really important to gather, that I really get. One is that there's the representative system needs an upgrade that we're talking about right now. And that makes a lot of sense to me, that we're really just making the point that first, we want to get a handle on how we divide the challenge up and share the information. So, and we've talked about this too, that in the political upgrade in the representative system, it actually coincides with an upgrade in the information system. So the free press was necessary because the presses were located in specific places where they could actually be taken down. People were destroying presses in totalitarian regimes in the age of the American Revolution. It was just like, you guys have pamphlets, where's your pamphlet printer? It's a Gutenberg machine, crash, you're done. So they were like, no, this is important, and no one really dominates that, so the information can flow, even if it's wild and gossipy back then. Same thing now. So the problem is we have wild and gossipy information, even more decentralized in an indestructible system designed by the military to withstand a nuclear assault. So, so goes the story about the internet and the creation of it, and why it's as indestructible and decentralized as it is. For information to be indestructible and the flow of it to happen through an internet instead of just straight lines.
Right.
And what we have as a problem is an information problem, number one. And the only way to have a trusted information problem to make good decisions turns out to be the same solution as we need for political decisioning. So the fourth, part of our government that we're missing is the press community, the informational community, the informed citizen leader community. And that's what I call the circle hub within neighborhoods. So there's specialists on key issues and overarching management of your bioregion or where you live. And then there's this other level where it's on special issues, local, regional, state, national. So when you have foster youth, you want a local consideration of how to do it in context of local cultural preferences and so on. There's state resources and alignment on learning best practice from everyone at the state level for more general best practice there. And then that goes to national at a certain point where you're sharing what makes sense to share as national resources, cooperative platform, tech development systems, investment, replication of technologies and systems. So you can just see that the governance and ideation, as well as the information, winds up having is resolved. And this is there's a lot of deep thinking that goes into this, by just having community circles where people are highly aligned according to their interest. And then the information, why we don't get too much information and why the information system is so flawed right now is, there's the deliberative side and information side that we've talked about. Then there's the corruption of how things work. And the propositions that we get are complicated because they're minor tweaks, and they get into a lot of minutia. And it's in a system that's still bifurcated with the duopoly. At the state level here in California, it's almost a monopoly here, as anywhere else. We have an open primary system here, but it's not really highly competitive. The level one improvement is to have open primaries everywhere. And Represent.us, as an organization that's promoting the Anti-Corruption Act, is really doing a great job to go state by state and have those laws changed so that we have the states govern how elections happen and how gerrymandering happen and how voting happens. And so they deciphered strategically that the most bulletproof way to make the change is not to have Citizens United overturned. It's to go state by state and change the way elections are conducted by calling it anti-corruption, having it passed there. Ideally, we get one at the federal level too. So it's these two parts. It's resolving and improving what has become a two-party duopoly gamed system, because two parties exist, not intentionally or maliciously. The administrators just seek conditions to preserve themselves like the bankers pay themselves.
Right.
They can't see that doing it. It's intergenerational. Wow. It's one guy and setting that up. But we have the antidotes to break that down and then build a new, strong, decentralized, resilient thing to replace it. So that's how I see evolution happening, to move from the old system to the new one without requiring violence, really, in a way.
There's something I want to pull out there that you've repeated actually earlier in the episode, where you specifically call out that it's not malicious. And there's something kind of beautiful and powerful about that, because when we realize that by and large, the people in government or the people in the banks or whoever we would consider to be an Illuminati or whatever, or a cabal, they're not necessarily doing things out of specific bad intent. It's more of a product of the way that the system is designed. And Peter Joseph goes into this a lot in his book, The New Human Rights Movement, which is really influential towards this podcast.
Tell me about that a little bit more, because I don't know about that.
Oh yeah, so Peter Joseph is the New Human Rights Movement, a wonderful book. And Peter Joseph is the guy, one of the main people. I'm sure he has a team, or I don't know if he does it all by himself, but he created the Zeitgeist movement, or he definitely did it with a team. It wasn't just him, but he's kind of the figurehead. And he wrote this book outlining how basically all of our issues when it comes to climate change or war or poverty or all the various crises that we have, it comes back down to the way that our economy is structured, the way that the system is organized. And he's arguing that it's not because that, people are out to get us, but it's, to your point, to preserve the system that they're in, right? So if I'm an elected official, I'm going to do everything in my power to maintain my position as someone that is able to, be in a position of influence.
No, I get it. No, and there really is. It's like I go back to an older example of it. Blaise Pascal, philosopher who came up with the calculus in France in the 18th century, I think it was. So no, 17th century. He describes, maybe even earlier, it might be the 16th century. He describes that this impulse in us is derived from desire. He was a Catholic, so he was a really severe Catholic who wore a hair shirt while he was figuring out the freaking calculus, but he's a brilliant poet and a great thinker. And he was like, it's this desire drive. If there isn't a teleological framework or an orientation and common purpose, like we talked about earlier, if you don't have a clear vision of what you want to create together, then the desire beast, the reptile, the freaking sex machine, greed thing, feed me, need machine, suffering fear machine takes over through the mechanism of our design. It will be encoded in our AI if we don't have an orientation to design the AI towards and say we have measurable results. That's a good AI because it's behaving towards where we want to go, or it's a bad AI because it's not. But if we don't have that orientation, we lose all teleological, all orientation. We don't have an end. There's no shape, there's no design, there's no telos, there's no purpose. So purpose, which is the end, really gives the orientation. And the beast just takes on, this is my version of the theory, is the beast just takes on whatever shape the weird permutations of desire can do within the structures as they are, because they won't change the structure. They'll find their way to feed themselves within the structure of their addiction to the structure and the status quo as it is. Or
what do you mean by
opiate
beast?
system are the animal drives and the unconscious drives that move us, right? Or in a human regulatory system, why opiates are so strong for us is because they regulate our homeostasis in our endogenous system. So we have opiate-like factors that say, hold it here. If not, cause pain in the person and a deep desire to re-regulate so that the heartbeat stays the same, so that the food level's the same. All these things, we are highly addicted to our homeostasis conditions, socially and individually. And so when you have homeostasis happening, mechanisms that people live in within those homeostasis conditions tend to proliferate. They have their own growth, not like a cancer. It's a living form of government, becomes a self-feeding thing. A living party becomes a self-feeding thing. A living tribe becomes a self-feeding thing. Not for a purpose, though, for the sake of its own growth, because life is life, right? Life wants to grow. I think life is the force, but dumb life, not intelligent, visioned life. Like Qigong says it this way, very simple, I'll put it this way. This is the quintessence. Where mind goes, Qi follows. If mind's not going, Qi's freaking where. It's a mess. It's a shit show, Qi. Where mind goes and intention goes, information follows. Otherwise, it's an information shit show. Where political mind goes, politics follow. But no political orientation, it's a shit show. We are in a shit show because collectively we have no vision.
Wow. Beautiful. Well said. Thank you. Honestly, I think let's end it there. I think that's brilliant. Thank you so
Ended
much.
on a little, just a
Yeah.
little bit of vision, just to say what it goes. Imagine this, and this is what I got through the ayahuasca, just a complete circle. Imagine that in this transition, we really get that we figure it out together, and we gather in circles of our friends.
Mhm.
And with those circles of our friends, we start to look at ourselves and say, what I care about that I'm going to then contribute to, because this is my mission passion. And imagine we do that for a few years and we actually start to get into specialized groups and teams to fill and fix all the problems. Boom, right? We get them all solved. What does it become? Here's the vision as I bookmark it. All of us have a family homestead that we're connected to. We have the rights to a place to live in the country for the rest of our lives. We get to go around and build them in this generation, and then we live there. Our children are born there. They're
Mhm.
raised there on that land. They know the landscape will never be changed. They have their first dates, first love. They bring their wedding partner or their long life partner, whatever you want to call them at that point, to theirs. They go to the others. Their kids are raised there. They die there. They're buried there. And then your grandkids come to your burial site, which is GPS marked, and it's a park without a gravestone. And you see, this is where Grandpa Scott and Grandpa Cosmo, the amazing revolutionaries, did this world that transformed it so that we could live in a beautiful planet in a beautiful place. And they didn't even want to take up any of the space with their memorial, so we could sit here in
Mm.
freedom in a parkland world and have a relationship to the world and land. And it's going to be abundant. It's going to be beautiful. People can hardly even imagine what it's going to be, but that's what we're coming to. And we have the means to do it.
I love
So if there's
that.
anything I would live, that's what it is. We have the means. It's just about getting it activated and choosing
Yeah.
collectively which the stuff is to make the world work for everyone.
Yeah. I'm with you right there, and that's a tall order
Yep.
to live up to, but I know it's possible, and I know that we will do that. And I'm optimistic about our future. I'm excited, and there's so much uh, there, so much opportunity to transform and redesign this world to make it more enjoyable for so many more people. Um, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And where can people learn more about your work? Where can people find you?
I think the best is Eden.coop. I'm Scott at Eden.coop. Feel free to reach out. Sometimes I've been posting in Facebook and Instagram, Facebook and YouTube at World Better Faster. So it's facebook.com/World Better Faster, or
Mm-hmm.
Eden Circles with a hyphen or something. But that one's complicated. You just go to Eden.coop and you find all the links and my information there. And yeah, that's it. And then through you, I mean, we're working together, so they're going to find you, and you find me.
That's right. Awesome.
Thank you,
So,
Cosmo. Great conversation.
yeah,
I love your jam.
absolutely.
It's great.
Yeah,
It's a good jam.
appreciate. Absolutely. So, thank you again, and we'll be back next week, next Wednesday, May 6th, with Doris Kim Sung, who is the founder of Dosu Architecture, which is a really fascinating firm making incredible works of art and building facades and really just unique inventions with metal that breathes, all oriented around how we can create a more regenerative future. So that'll be at 1 o'clock. Looking forward to seeing everyone there next week. And as always, if you're enjoying this podcast, feel free to leave a review on iTunes and subscribe as well. It really helps us out. And thank you so much. And we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Ciao.